I'm starting a new series where in the past I was looking at arguments against universalism. Now I'm starting a series where I'll be looking at arguments defending eternal damnation. In this video, I found immensely interesting. The United Methodist Church has been in the news a lot recently because it's going through a very historic schism. We've never really seen anything like it. We have seen schisms over the matter of gay marriage and LGBT inclusion in the church before, but we've never seen a schism this big or this national, this slow either. It's very fascinating to watch, to say the least, and undeniably, the United Methodist Church is going to be very different in a few years. This is actually somewhat personal because I was born a United Methodist, and my parents end up swapping to a more conservative holiness church because they had a better youth program. And here in the South, we have a lot of United Methodist, and this schism is affecting a lot of people. I've lived near a bunch of churches that have recently seceded. In fact, I live near at least three churches, which are within I'd say 10 miles of my house, have all left the United Methodist Church. And I think they've all become independent. They haven't joined the Global Methodist. And I know of other churches that are not too far from me that have joined the Global Methodist or something else. And you just see it all around. You see these churches, like one day they're part of the United Methodist Church, and then the next they're taking off the logo. My childhood church, the one I was baptized in as a baby, has not succeeded yet. They have become a lighthouse congregation. I'd say they're a moderate church. They're not really liberal. They're not affirming, but they're not hyper-conservative either. So I know the United Methodist Church still on paper believes in eternal damnation, but in the church itself, opinions are radically varied. Rather, I found this video interesting because though this is being made by the United Methodist Church, really this kind of argument defending hell, you're more likely to hear from an evangelical or a Catholic, not really a mainline Protestant, though you still will hear this argument made, and this was approved by United Methodist Church officials. Though the United Methodist Church, I say at least 50% chance that it will probably become the most liberal denomination in the country, perhaps even more liberal than the United Church of Christ today, which is hard to think about, but I think the likelihood is pretty high because we've never seen a denomination just completely see all of its conservatives break off. But it seems to be pretty likely that will happen. Just because this split is so publicized, everybody's talking about it, everyone knows about it. So I'd be willing to bet that the United Methodist Church will become one of the most liberal churches in the country, and this video will become a bizarre artifact of history. It was a part of a series by Reverend Adam Hamilton, who is a major United Methodist Church pastor, who has actually become a Universalist, or already was a Universalist, though I think he's more of a liberal Universalist, not quite the biblical Universalism we advocate for on the channel. I advocate for on the channel. So I found this video very interesting. Though it's made by the United Methodist Church, you're more likely to hear this kind of argument from an evangelical or a Catholic. Without further ado, it's an interesting little video and an interesting time capsule of United Methodist history.
So people ask me, do you believe in hell? And the truth is, I don't want to believe in hell. I don't like the idea of it. But as I think about hell, logically, it seems like it has to be there. And here's what I mean. Jesus said that we're to pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And when I think about that, I think that means that heaven would be a place where God's will is done, where we love perfectly, we love God, we love our neighbor, where justice is done, where we live selflessly and we live as servants, and we find the joy of that. I think if that's what heaven is, then it must be true that there has to be a place for people who don't want to live that way. But God doesn't force us to experience heaven. God doesn't force us to do his will. He allows us. And so everyone is invited, but we still have a choice. I'm not interested in doing God's will. I don't want to be in a place where I have to do God's will. And so to me, that seems there's a natural and logical corollary that there must be a place for those who don't want to do God's will. And when I think about Dante's Inferno and these various levels of hell, he was painting, and the idea of people gnawing on each other or eating each other, just constantly trying to get something from somebody else and satisfy their own needs, a place of deep hunger and yet no fulfillment. And that's what I think of hell as. And I don't think God intends anyone to go there. I think God's intention is that everyone come to the party, but that he won't force us to come to his party. And I love how C.S. Lewis describes it. He says, hell is a place where the doors are locked from the inside with the idea that we could always escape if we chose to. But there are people who will never choose the life that God offers us in heaven, but instead will choose a life still absorbed in self.
So there's a lot to unpack there. Pretty much the argument that he's made, and this has really become very popular with C.S. Lewis and others over the course of the 20th century, now into the 21st century, as the church is entering into a period of reformation. Those who believe in eternal damnation have tried to find new ways to defend their belief, and they've tried a few different ways, but this is probably one of the most popular, if not the most popular at the moment, and that is this, the gates of hell are locked from the inside approach, putting a hyper emphasis on man's free will. And man's free will is important. I come up out of the Armenian tradition, so I do believe in the free will of man. I don't believe that God chooses people to go to heaven or to go to hell. So I do think free will is very important. But do they really believe in free will? Atheists have pointed this out, and I have to agree with them there that if you really think about it, no one really has a fair shot. Everyone's free will is always affected. What I mean is somebody born in rural Alabama has much better chances of accepting Jesus Christ as Lord, therefore making it into heaven, than someone born in Iran, or someone born in India. These are just the facts. And people like to say, and this belief is increasingly catching on, and I think it's a good thing because I agree with it, that people still have a chance at salvation even if they never hear the gospel or never really hear it correctly. And I would agree with that because the law is written on the heart of man. But even then, the likelihood of you accepting Christ in this lifetime is lowered by there not being an institutional church there to guide you. So already your free will is already a little bit screwed up. And not to mention people that are abused by the church, there are thousands of people abused by the church in this country alone, who have completely turned their back on God, or people that the only example they've ever had of a Christian, usually living inside a secular post-Christian society, is of these incredibly hypocritical, people. A lot of people are just, the only experience they ever have with the church is hateful. And of course, they're never going to follow Jesus Christ if the only experience they have with his church is of hateful people. I'm not saying that's an excuse. All of that's not an excuse to at least try to come to know God, come to know Christ. But we have to accept that free will is already skewed. I mean, you have to factor in being born into a Christian country or not, how you're related to the church, either you ever hear of it or not. I mean, the 21st century is really the first century where we can truly say that the church is in every country. Even just 100 years ago, the church was not in every part of the world, and it still isn't today, but we can at least say it's in every country. There are still, of course, people that have never heard. And in a lot of Western countries, biblical literacy and knowledge of the gospel has actually plummeted over the last 100 years. So it's gotten worse, and they just have these horrible images of Christians. So free will is always skewed. Really, this is a new idea that it's all free will, free will, free will. Because the traditional defense was that God sends people to hell, and I would agree with that. God ultimately sends people to hell. It's just that's clearly biblical. God ultimately does the decision. We do have a role to play, but ultimately God saves us. God plays a massive role in this, and it just isn't this hyper free will. And those believe in eternal damnation, do they really believe in free will? What I mean is, they believe that over the course of your lifetime, you're incredibly biased, uninformed free will. You only have about, 80 years until you die. You only have about 80 years to make the decision or not. Maybe if you're lucky, maybe 100. But after that, bye-bye. And your free will is gone. And this is what I find so bizarre about a lot of apologists. They'll be like, yeah, they could get out if they wanted, but they're just God, and ultimately they pretty much say that God has chosen to damn them because the only way that, because they'll just admit that really the only way somebody would remain in hell forever is God gave up, because God is infinite and God is good. God is love. That means that love and goodness are infinite. Love, goodness, and truth, because God is all those things, are infinite because God is infinite. He is infinitely powerful. Meanwhile, evil, lies, deception, all that are finite. Therefore, the only reason somebody would stay in hell forever if God gave up on them. Because eventually God would break them down. Of course, I believe in free will, but I believe our free will has limits. I believe that we can choose when we call to Christ, respond to Christ's call, but eventually, just because God is an infinite God and man is a finite being, as John Calvin said, man is not capable of understanding the infinite. The finite is not capable of understanding the infinite. Kind of that comparison. Man is finite. God is infinite. Therefore, eventually, God will overwhelm man. If God is truth, which God is, the devil is the father of lies. What I'm getting at is that ultimately, goodness will triumph over evil. And since goodness is infinite and evil is finite, eventually goodness will triumph over evil. And of course, I've gone to the many different arguments for universal salvation on the show. Of course, my video recently, Universalism Debunked, goes through most common arguments against universalism. But of course, I'll go through, the Greek word aion just means age. Therefore, the punishment in hell is not forever. Not to mention the many, many, many different passages in the Bible that talk about God wanting to save all men. What's so funny about most Christians is they'll say the whole world falls with Adam, but they'll say only a fraction of the world rises with Christ, but Christ is the second Adam. That means that you believe that Adam's sinfulness is greater than Christ's righteousness, which I've always found very bizarre. So this argument from free will doesn't really make sense because they really believe that your free will is massively dependent upon where you're born and how the church relates to you. It's massively skewed whether or not you're going to become a Christian or not. Not to mention people, like a lot of people convert because they know the right people. Sometimes people just know the wrong people. All that influences you, what road you go on. I'm not saying that's not an excuse to become a Christian, but most people don't make it. That's what Jesus taught. Most people don't make it. And they really don't believe in free will after the grave. Like all these apologists, they'll be like, they just have a hardened heart. Well, God could soften their heart if he wants to. The only reason anybody would stay in hell forever is if God stopped trying. That's the only reason. And if you know what I've talked about on fire before, that fire is a symbol of purification. That's the symbol of God's love, burning away all that is evil, purifying away. As the book of Revelation is a symbol of purification, the sulfur fire is a symbol of the purification of the soul. I truly do believe that the soul will be purified. God says he's going to make all things new, and I truly believe it. So that's, I guess, all for today. This argument from free will doesn't make sense because everybody's free will is massively skewed. And then their free will doesn't really exist after they die, in their opinion, because God's given up on them. And then finally, my final critique is why not annihilationism? And that's why a lot of people are becoming annihilationists, because if you take this logic to its final extent is that God is a good, loving God, and he doesn't want to send anyone to hell or torture them, but he can't save them. Well, then why would he allow them to exist forever if he knows they're never going to accept them? So that's why a lot of people are becoming annihilationists, just saying that God will destroy them. And at least that's better than believing in eternal damnation. That's still not the truth. Well, I think that's all for today. I will talk more about the United Methodist Church on my video on how to save woke churches, and why I think that's the most important mission field for Christian Universalists today are more liberal denominations. Well, like and subscribe. If you're curious about Christian Universalism, I just made a video called Universalism Debunked, where I go through most major common arguments against Christian Universalism. I'd highly recommend that video. It probably would answer a lot of your questions. Well, I hope you have a good day. God bless. And if you're curious, I would say probably the United Methodist Church is not the best church for Universalists. I would say probably the best churches for Universalists in America are the Disciples of Christ, the United Church of Christ, and the Evangelical Lutheran Church. So the United Methodist Church is still a good church. But I'll get to all that later, another time. Well, God bless, and like and subscribe.